Ezra. In the first year of Koresh, king of Persia, in order for the word of Adonai prophesied by Yirmiyahu to be fulfilled, Adonai stirred up the spirit of Koresh, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his whole kingdom, which he also put in writing as follows. Here is what Koresh, king of Persia, says. Adonai, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms on earth. He has charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, in Yehuda. Whoever there is among you, all his people, may his God be with him. He may go up in Jerusalem and Yehuda and build the house of Adonai, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem. Let every survivor, no matter where he lives, be helped by his neighbors with silver, gold, goods, and animals, in addition to the voluntary offerings for the house of God in Jerusalem. The heads of the fathers' clans in Yehuda and Benjamin, along with the Kohanim, the Levi'im, and indeed all whose spirit God has stirred, set out to go up and rebuild the house of Adonai in Jerusalem. All their neighbors supported them by giving them articles of silver, gold, goods, animals, and valuables, besides all their voluntary offerings. In addition, Koresh the king brought out the vessels from the house of Adonai, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from Jerusalem and put in the house of his God. Koresh, king of Persia, had Matredat, the treasurer, bring them out and make an inventory of them for Sheshbazzar, the prince of Yehuda. The list was as follows: gold basins, 30, silver basins, 1,000, knives, 29, gold bowls, 30, silver bowls of a different kind, 410, other vessels, 1,000. In all there were 5,400 articles of gold and silver. Sheshbazzar took all of them, along with the exiles, were brought up from Babal to Jerusalem. Here is a list of the people of the provinces who had been exiled, carried off to Babal by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babal, but who later returned from exile and went up to Jerusalem and Yehuda, each to his own city. They went with Zerubbabel, Yeshua, Nehemiah, Syria, Reliah, Mordecai, Belshan, Mispar, Bigvi, Rechem, and Baanah. The number of the men of the people of Israel, descendants of Parash, 2,172. Descendants of Shephatiah, 372. Descendants of Arach, 775. Descendants of Pachat Moab, from the descendants of Yeshua and Moab, 2,812. Descendants of Elam, 1,254. Descendants of Zetu, 945. Descendants of Zekah, 760. Descendants of Bani, 642. Descendants of Bava, 623. Descendants of Azgad, 1,222. Descendants of Adon-Kam, 666. Descendants of Bigva, 2,056. Descendants of Aden, 454. Descendants of Attar and Yachziah, 98. Descendants of Betzah, 323. Descendants of Yorah, 112. Descendants of Hashum, 223. Descendants of Gebar, 95. Descendants of Bet Lechem, 123. People of Naphtah, 56. People of Antot, 128. Descendants of Azmavet, 42. Descendants of Kariat, Arim, Kafra, and Berot, 743. Descendants of Ramah and Giva, 621. Peoples of Michmas, 122. People of Beet El and Ai, 223. Descendants of Novo, 52. Descendants of Mikbish, 156. Descendants of other Eliam, 1,254. Descendants of Haram, 320. Descendants of Lod, Hadid, and Ono, 725. Descendants of Jericho, 345. Descendants of Sanaa, 3,630. The Kohanim, descendants of Yehuda, the house of Yeshua, 973. Descendants of Emer, 1,052. Descendants of Pashkur, 1,247. Descendants of Haram, 1,017. The Levaam, descendants of Yeshua and Kadmiel, and the descendants of Hadvayah, 74. The singers, descendants of Asaph, 126. The descendants of the gatekeepers, the descendants of Shulam, the descendants of Atir, descendants of Talman, descendants of Ahuv, descendants of Hatit, and descendants of Shuvah, in all 139. The temple servants, descendants of Zikha, descendants of Hasupha, descendants of Tabat, descendants of Kiros, descendants of Seha, descendants of Padan, descendants of Lavna, descendants of Hagavah, descendants of Akuv, descendants of Achav, descendants of Selma, descendants of Hanan, descendants of Gedel, descendants of Girkar, descendants of Ria, descendants of Retzin, descendants of Kado, descendants of Gazam, descendants of Uzzah, descendants of Pesach, descendants of Bisa, descendants of Esna, descendants of Meunim, descendants of Nephsim, descendants of Bachbuch, descendants of Hachfu, descendants of Harhur, descendants of Batzlat, descendants of Machida, descendants of Harsha, descendants of Barchos, descendants of Sisra, descendants of Tamich, descendants of Nisach, descendants of Hatifa, the descendants of Shlomo's servants, the descendants of Sota, the descendants of Hosopharit, descendants of Pruda, descendants of Ya'ala, descendants of Darchan, descendants of Gidel, descendants of Shivya, descendants of Hatel, descendants of Porchret, Hatzvayim, and descendants of Ami. All the temple servants and the descendants of Shlomo's servants numbered 392. The following went up to Tel Melech, Tel Harshu, Keruv, Adan, and Immer. But they could not state their father's clan they or their children belonged to, so it was not clear whether they were from Israel. Descendants of Dilyah, descendants of Toviah, descendants of Nekoda, 652. And of the descendants of the Kohanim, the descendants of Haviah, descendants of Hachotz, and the descendants of Brazila, who took a wife from the daughters of Brazila, the Gileadi, and was named after them. These tried to locate their genealogical records, but they weren't found. Therefore, they were considered defiled and were not allowed to serve as Kohanim. The Tirshta told them not to eat any of the especially holy food until the Kohanim appeared who could consult the Urim and Tumim. The entire assembly numbered 42,360, not including their male and female slaves, of whom were 7,337. They also had 200 male and female singers. Their horses numbered 736, their mules 245, their camels 435, and their donkeys 6,720. Some of the heads of the fathers' clans, when they came to the house of Adonai in Jerusalem, made voluntary offerings for rebuilding the house of God on its site. According to their means, they gave into the treasury and their work 61,000 gold darkmonim, about 2/3 a ton, and 5,000 manim of silver, just over 3 tons, and 100 tunics for the Kohanim. So the Kohanim, the Levaim, people of Israel, the singers, the gatekeepers, and the temple servants lived in their towns, and all Israel in their towns. When the 7th month arrived, after the people of Israel had resettled in the towns, the people gathered with one accord in Jerusalem. Then Yeshua, the son of Yotzadok, with his fellow Kohanim, and Zerubbabel, the son of Shatiel, with his kinsmen, organized rebuilding the altar of God of Israel, so they could offer burnt offerings on it, as it was written in the Torah of Moshe, the man of God. They set up their altar in its former bases. Despite feeling threatened by the peoples of the surrounding countries, they offered on it burnt offerings to Adonai, the morning and evening burnt offerings. They observed the festival of Sukkot as written, ordered daily number of burnt offerings prescribed for each day, and afterward and afterwards the regular burnt offerings, the offerings of Rosh Hodesh, and those for all designated times set apart for Adonai, as well as those for everyone who volunteered a voluntary offering to Adonai. From the first day of the 7th month, they began offering burnt offerings to Adonai, even though the foundation of Adonai's temple had not yet been laid. They also gave money to the stone workers and carpenters, as well as food, drink, olive oil, and the people of Zidon and Zor, bringing cedar logs from the Lebanon to the sea on the Yopho, in accordance with authorization granted by Koresh, king of Persia. In the 2nd year after they arrived in the house of God in Jerusalem, in the 2nd month, Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, Yeshua, the son of Yotzadak, the rest of their kinsmen, the Kohanim, the Levi'im, and all who had come out of exile to Jerusalem began the project. They appointed the Levi'im, aged 20 and up, to direct the work of the house of Adonai. Yeshua and his sons and brothers, Kadmiel and his sons and Yehuda's sons, together directed the workers of the house of God. Also the sons of Henadad and their sons, and the kinsmen of the Levi'im. When the builders laid the foundation of the temple of Adonai, the Kohanim in their robes with trumpets, and the Levi'im, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals, took their places to praise Adonai, as David, king of Israel, had instructed. They sang antiphonally praises and giving thanks to Adonai, for he is good, for his grace continues forever toward Israel. All the people raised a great shout of praise to Adonai, because the foundation of the house of Adonai had been laid. But many of the Kohanim, Levi'im, and heads of the fathers' clans, the old men, who had seen the first house standing on its foundation, wept aloud when they saw this house, while others shouted out for joy, so that the people couldn't distinguish the noise of the joyful shouting from the noise of the people weeping. For the people were shouting so loudly that the noise could be heard at a great distance. When the enemies of Yehuda and Benjamin heard the people from the exile were building the temple of Adonai, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel, and the heads of the fathers' clans said to them, "Let us build along with you, for we seek your God just as you do, and we have been sacrificing to him since the time of Esar-Haddon, king of Ashur, who brought us here." But Zerubbabel, Yeshua, and the rest of the heads of the fathers' clans of Israel answered them, "You and we have nothing in common, that you should join us in building the house of our God. We will build by ourselves for Adonai, the God of Israel, as Koresh, king of Persia, ordered us to do." Then the land began discouraging the people of Yehuda in order to make them afraid to build. They also bribed officials to frustrate their plan throughout the lifetime of Koresh, king of Persia, and on into the reign of Darvish, king of Persia. During the reign of Ashverosh, at the beginning of his reign, they brought a charge in writing against the people living in Yehuda and Jerusalem. Then, during the time of Artsachshashta, Bashlim, Matzdat, Tavil, and their colleagues wrote Achtashshashti. A letter was written in Aramaic, using Aramaic script. Rehum, the distinct governor, and Shimsha, the secretary, wrote the letter against Jerusalem to Artachshashta, king, as follows. From Rehum, the distinct governor, Shimsha, the secretary, their other colleagues, and the judges, the officials, the Danim, and Arphsat, Kim, the Tarplim, the Arphsim, and Achim, the Balim, the Shushakayim, the Dahayim, the Elamim, and other nations whom the great and noble Anpar deported and settled in Shamron, and the others who remained in the country beside the Euphrates River. This is the text of the letter they sent him. To Artachshashta, the king, from his servants and people beyond the river. Let the king know that the Judeans who left you to come to us in Jerusalem are building this rebellious and wicked city. They have finished the walls and are now dipping the foundations. So let the king know that if this city is rebuilt and the walls are finished, they will refuse to pay tribute, tax, or toll, and this will reduce the royal revenue. Now, because we eat the king's salt, and it is not right for us to see the king dishonored, we therefore are sending to inform the king, so that a search can be made in the archives of your ancestors and their archives. You will find a certain that this city is indeed a rebellious city, the bane of kings and provinces, and that sedition has been fostered there since ancient times, which is why this city was destroyed. We submit to the king that if this city is rebuilt and the walls finished, you will soon lose possession of all territories beyond the river. The king sent this answer to Rehum, the district governor, Shamshi, the secretary, their other colleagues living in Shamron, and the rest beyond the river. Shalom! The letter you sent us has now been translated for me. I ordered a search made, and it was found that this city has a long history of revolt against kings, that rebellion and sedition has been fostered there, also that there have been powerful kings over Jerusalem who ruled all the territory beyond the river, and tribute, taxes, and tolls were paid to them. So now, order that these men stop work and that the city not be rebuilt until I order it. Take care not to neglect your duty, otherwise the harm may increase to damage of the king. When the text of King Artachshashta's letter was read before Rehum, Shamsha, the secretary, and their colleagues, they hurried to Jerusalem to the Judeans and stopped their work by force of arms. So the work of the house of God in Jerusalem ceased. It remained at a standstill until the second year of the reign of Darvish, king of Persia. The prophets of Haggai and Zechariah, the son of Iddo, prophesied to the Judeans in Jerusalem and Yehuda. They prophesied to them in the name of God of Israel. Then Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Yeshua, the son of Yotzadak, began rebuilding the house of God in Jerusalem. With them there were the prophets of God helping them. No sooner had they begun when Tatni, the governor of the territory beyond the Euphrates River, Shatar, Bazna, and their colleagues came and asked them, "Who gave you permission to rebuild the house and finish this wall? What are the names of the men putting up this building?" By the eye of their God was on the leaders of the Judeans, so they didn't stop until the matter could come before Darvish and reply in writing it be received. Here is the text of the letter which Tatni, the governor of the territory beyond the river, Shatar, Bazni, and their fellow officials beyond the river sent to Darvish the king. They sent him a letter in which it was written, "To Darvish the king, complete shalom. Let the king know that we went to the province of Yehuda, to the house of the great God. It is being rebuilt with large stones, and timber is being set in the walls. This work is being done energetically, and it is making good progress under the direction of their leaders. We asked them, 'Who gave you permission to rebuild this house and finish the wall?' We also asked them their names, so that we could write you the names of the men in charge of them. They gave us this answer: 'We are the servants of God of heaven and earth. We are rebuilding the house that was built many years ago, built and finished by a great king of Israel. But because our ancestors provoked the God of heaven, he handed them over to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Baval, the Casti. He destroyed this house and carried the people off to Baval. But in the first year of Koresh, king of Baval, Koresh the king gave authorization to rebuild this house of God. Moreover, the gold and silver articles belonging to the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar had removed from the temple of Jerusalem and brought to the temple of Baval. Koresh the king took out the temple of Baval. They were turned over to a man named Sheshbazzar, whom he had appointed governor. He said to them, 'Take these articles, go, put them in the temple in Jerusalem, and let the house of God be rebuilt in its original site.' So this same Sheshbazzar came and laid the foundations of the house of God in Jerusalem. It has been under construction ever since, and it isn't finished yet. Now, therefore, if it seems good to the king, let a search be made in the royal treasury there in Baval to determine whether a decree was issued by Koresh the king to rebuild the house of God in Jerusalem. And let the king send us his decision concerning this matter."